Bobby Fischer hated the fact that chess was being ruined by memorization, so he invented Fischer Random. Magnus Carlsen, however, sharing this same intense feeling, had a completely different solution, playing the worst possible opening on purpose. In this particular game, he plays the combination of the worst 3 moves possible, hands his opponent a ridiculously large advantage, and then spends the rest of the game clawing back from an obviously lost position. But is it really over? Magnus's opponent is Ilya Gruzman, a candidate master rated around 2,000 online. Before anyone dismisses that number, a 2,000 rated player is better than approximately 99.5% of everyone who has ever touched a chess piece. Gruzman is not a weak player. He's an excellent player who, on this particular day in early 2023, gets the pairing of his life. Round 2 of Title Tuesday, paired against the world number 1 because Magnus lost in round 1 and got paired down. Gruzman is probably expecting some world-class opening preparation in reply to his d4 push. What he gets instead is knight to a6, the worst square a knight can occupy, played on the very first move. The engine ranks this as the 6th worst response to d4 that black could possibly play. Gruzman plays pawn to c4, taking more central space, and now Magnus plays knight to h6. Both knights are now on the rim, in the grimmest squares available on the entire board within 2 moves, or what I would like to call the Brothers Grimm. That is exactly right. At this point, the engine is already giving white an advantage of around 1 1/3 pawns. Then, after knight to c3 from Gruzman, Magnus plays pawn to e5, giving away a free pawn for literally no reason at all. Now it just looks ridiculous. Magnus is definitely trolling the poor guy, and his position just keeps getting worser and worser. In fact, out of the 7.3 billion games played on Lichess, fewer than 200 have ever reached this position. This opening has no name in any theory book, it doesn't appear in any database worth consulting, and exists in approximately 1 out of every 40 million online games. But can he really afford to keep playing like this? The pawn on e5 is captured. After pawn to d6 from Magnus attacking the advanced pawn, Gruzman correctly plays knight to f3 rather than capturing on d6. Capturing would only help Magnus develop the bishop on a beautiful square for free, and Gruzman doesn't want that, so he declines the gift. Magnus plays bishop to e6, eyeing the c4 pawn, but not yet threatening to take it. Queen to a4 with check would win the bishop immediately if black tried. Bishop to g5, the engine's top choice, developing with tempo on the queen. Magnus retreats to d7. The engine now shows white with an advantage of over 2 pawns. By any objective measure, this game should be over. Pawn to e3 from Gruzman, reasonable, though queen to b3 was actually the strongest move here, attacking b7 and preparing rook to d1 opposite the black queen. Knight to g4 from Magnus, adding more pressure. Gruzman plays d6, correctly capturing despite giving Magnus a nice square for the recapturing bishop, and then pawn to h3. And this is the move that starts to let Magnus back in. Gruzman is probably expecting knight to e5, a trade of pieces, queens off the board, a simplified position where his extra pawn converts cleanly. But that trade would actually benefit Magnus. His bishops would become active, one pointing down a threatening diagonal, and the exchange would suit black's position much better than white's. Magnus declines it, knight to f6 instead, and after bishop to f6 and the recapture, Magnus has a shattered kingside pawn structure on top of his pawn deficit. But watch what happens next, because this is where the game changes completely. Gruzman plays knight to d5. And this single move throws away the entire winning advantage he had spent building. Queen to d4 followed by queenside castling was the correct approach, consolidating the extra pawn, getting the king to safety, making black prove he can generate compensation for the material deficit. But the knight on d5 has been sadly seduced. It seemingly attacks the pawn on f6, threatens a royal family fork, and really it looks like black has no good defense. And in this position, Magnus finds the best defensive resource. He castles queenside. Now look at what happens if Gruzman takes the pawn on f6. Bishop to b4 check. If white blocks with the knight falls immediately to bishop takes d2 with check. If white plays king to e2 instead, blocking the bishop's defense of c4, then bishop takes c4 check follows. Queen to d3 is the only move, and then queen takes d3 checkmate. The pawn on f6 is a complete trap. It cannot be touched. Gruzman sees this and wisely plays bishop to e2 instead. Magnus pushes pawn to c6, kicking the knight out of d5. Knight back to c3, and now the position is near equality, which is extraordinary. Magnus went from losing by 2 pawns to equal position simply by waiting for one over-aggressive move and castling at the right moment. Rook to g8 from Magnus, immediately attacking g2 and preventing Gruzman from castling kingside, since bishop takes h3 would exploit the pin and win material. Once again, Gruzman finds the best move with king to f1, tucking the king away manually. Magnus plays queen to e7, creating a discovery threat on Gruzman's queen. Queen to a4 from Gruzman, fine, though queen to c2 was stronger, keeping an eye on f5 and setting up knight to d5 ideas. King to b8 from Magnus, making the king marginally safer. Pawn to a3 from Gruzman, preparing the b4-b5 queenside storm. And then bishop to e5, inviting the knight to capture and offering to repair Magnus's kingside pawn structure in the process. Knight takes e5, and now Magnus recaptures with pawn on f6, and now the doubled pawns are gone. Magnus no longer has the bishop pair, but at least the structure is resolved. Pawn to b4 from Gruzman, the queenside advance continuing, and now queen to g5 from Magnus. Double attack on g2, demanding a response, and here we see white play bishop to f3. And this is the decisive mistake, and it works on 2 levels simultaneously. First, the bishop on f3 no longer defends the c4 pawn, which can now be taken with check. Second, and this is the more immediate problem, Magnus plays pawn to f5, threatening to push and drive the bishop off its defensive post entirely. Gruzman plays pawn to g3, trying to hold the structure, but Magnus captures on c4 with check. The king moves to g2, stepping directly into the line of fire of the rook on g8 and the queen on g5, making it not really a good decision on Gruzman's part. King to e1 would have been slightly better, but I guess Gruzman wanted his rooks connected.
But now, this makes way for Magnus to infiltrate with rook to d2, the rook pouring into the second rank. King to g1 from Gruzman, unpinning the f-pawn. And here, Magnus plays knight to c5, a move that serves no immediate purpose, a moment of pause before the inevitable. Perhaps savoring it, perhaps just making sure the calculation is airtight before committing. After the knight is captured, Magnus plays the incredible, utterly disgusting, mate-forcing sacrifice of his queen on g3, and white has exactly 2 options. Bishop to g2 allows queen takes g2 checkmate immediately, so Gruzman accepts the sacrifice. Rook takes g3 with check. The only block is bishop to g2, since the f1 square is covered by Magnus's bishop on c4, eliminating that escape, and then rook g takes g2 checkmate. Honestly, Gruzman played really well. But that's the thing about playing Magnus with the worst possible opening. He doesn't need a good position to win. He just needs you to make one mistake and he'll make you regret playing chess. But if you're like me and won't give up that easily, then there's a lot you will have to learn about chess, something that could bring you closer to playing like the elites you admire, someone like Bobby Fischer. And guys, I'm excited to share the news with you that our very first book, which will solve your exact problems in thinking, playing, and making decisions like Bobby Fischer, will be launching in exactly 1 week from now. So if you're excited, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. In the meantime, you probably know how crazily good Fischer was, but what was the craziest opening he ever played? Watch that over here.